Hakan.
Hi, Elizabeth. We are here again.
We're here. We have some wonderful guests to help with some amazing insights, and we'll be talking about today organizational crisis management.
Yes, and it's getting more and more meaningful because our societal sudden organizational isolation continues, and it looks like it's going to continue a little bit more while. So right now, a lot of the organizations are struggling to understand not only what's happening now, but also what's going to happen in the future. And it looks like we don't know how long it will continue. And accordingly, a lot of the organizations are trying to manage crisis in a very unpredicted environment. And for that, my dear colleague, Dr. Ryan Fleur from the College of Business Administration is with us again. He was in our episode 5, so now he's here again to talk about crisis management in service sector.
And we also have with us to share his experience, boots on the ground, the CEO of Fluency Incorporated and Language World. Bill, Fluency is a software company related to interpreting, but we're going to focus today just on Language World. Can you just tell us who is Language World? What is your mission?
We are specifically and primarily, at least before in February, let's say, a face-to-face interpreting agency, which was we would dispatch a trained, qualified, prepared professional linguist to go to the clinics, the health and human service appointments, the behavioral health appointments, and provide actual on-site interpreting services in about 25 different languages that are spoken up here in Northern California. And we would provide those services for UC San Francisco, Kaiser Permanente, Dignity Health, and a lot of others.
And this is a face-to-face, people-oriented business.
Absolutely. Absolutely. On demand and some full-time, part-time people. So we had over 234 employees. And now I think we're about 64 right now. And we're still burning cash. So we have to be very careful about how to scale to the point where we can sustain ourselves over this next 6 months and hopefully be prepared for reopening. And that's the real dance that we're kind of pirouetting on the pin needle here.
So Ryan, I know you've done some work on mindful crisis management and mindless crisis management, a concept that I really like. And several organizations are right now juggling through this crisis also in a societal environment where people are isolated. So given this extraordinary social context, can you help us see some of the pitfalls for organizations that they might get into so they become mindless in their efforts?
So mindfulness is about basically openness to new information, responding, adapting. And what I found in my research is that a lot of organizations are not prepared for crises. And so when they're confronted with a crisis, they often treat it as a threat and are in a defensive stance. And so when organizations respond, mindlessly to a crisis, that means that, they're basically responding with the same routines that they've developed beforehand, that they are not really adapting. And that is a pitfall when it comes to responding to a crisis, because the more you view it as a threat, the more you respond with the same routines, the more likely, your organization's not going to emerge from the crisis.
But Ryan, how does an organization not view this as a threat? How do you not view it as a threat, these circumstances?
Well, it is, right? It is a threat, but, also crises, when you view them mindfully, they can also present opportunities.
So Ryan, in the midst of these ambiguities, can you help us understand what leaders can do by drawing on the resilience and renewal model?
Yes, thank you, Hakan. So the resilience model was developed by some of my colleagues in communication, namely Rob Ulmer. And the model focuses on 4 things. The first is ethical communication, which is really around how the organization uses its values to communicate during a crisis and beyond. The second thing is around organizational learning, which is how the organization takes learning from the crisis, whether that's direct experience or vicarious learning or unlearning in order to demonstrate to stakeholders that it's taking corrective action. The third thing with this model is prospective vision, which is how the organization looks forward rather than backward. And the final aspect of this model is the organization's effective rhetoric or communication. And that's how the organization is able to convince stakeholders to stick with them throughout a crisis and beyond, and to convince them that they'll not only emerge the same, but better after a crisis.
So using those 4 different dimensions, we can create a continuum, like 2 ends of the continuum. The good end of the continuum is that you got this leader who sticks to the values, who is very transparent with communication, and also learns and unlearns, gets into a venture to explore what's happening in the environment, and with a prospective vision rather than regrets, but let's look at what's the bright side, what we can do, and also spelling that out so vividly and strongly that he or she can still drive the employees and the stakeholders. The other end of the continuum, though, which can easily also happen because not all the leaders are created equally. You can have this unethical communication tendencies and hiding information. You might have some personnel decisions already coming, so you might use the pandemic as an excuse. So create kind of a pandemic premium so that you can move your agenda, and also keep on doing what you have done in the past that's worked for you, ignoring the organization. And also retrospective vision, getting caught up with the past and trying things that you have tried in the past that it's not working right now, but you never realize that. And also you never have a clear vision. And each time your employees or stakeholders come to you and ask you something, you say, we are in a crisis, I cannot do this right now. So I think this is the least type of leader that we want as a society right now. And what we should be pursuing for is the good leader. So Bill, in our earlier conversation, you have mentioned that if you got this magic wish that would come true, one thing that you would really want is this transitionary domain where you can divert your resources and energy and still continue to perform. So can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, yeah, there was during pandemics, I read an article. I'm a voracious reader. Of course, I'm probably reading too much news like we all are, and it can tend to make you a little crazy. But, I've been looking at this contact tracing sort of job, let's say, and there were some job descriptions I found. I also found that UCSF and UCLA are working on a collaborative approach to training. And it sounds like they're going to need thousands and thousands of people to help track down positive COVID-19 cases and sort of assemble the bubble that they've been living in and connecting the dots about who they've come in contact with. And I thought to myself, wow, this is a perfect kind of pivot point for my workforce. We're clinically trained, we understand medical confidentiality, and we're bilingual, which is 40% of California. So it would stand to reason that would be a nice add-on if it's not pure interpreting, something similar to that social assistance kind of work.
So this is demanding a lot of creativity on your part.
Yeah, and some cooperation from people who are hiring, if they are. We're still working that out.
And I think that's the key word. And creativity in dismantling and remantling your components is almost like a Lego. Yeah. Given this new context, how can you rebuild a new system that you can still provide services? Maybe it's not exactly the same service, or maybe it's a brand new service, but it's still the same resources. So Ryan, you told a great story about this early 20th century transitioning of the transportation system. Maybe we can learn something from it. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, Hakan. So that comes back to the concepts of mindfulness and mindlessness that we were talking about earlier, and in particular around categories. Ellen Langer talks about how we sometimes make premature cognitive commitments, which and act from a single perspective. And so she uses the railroad industry, as an example of sticking too close to categories that were developed, and some of these companies failed because they viewed themselves only as railroad companies, right, rather than transportation companies.
Because of that mind change, and now the train ride concept has changed. So reconceptualizing what you provide, and I think that also has to do with what you do as an organization, because a lot of the organizations right now naturally are very self-defensive. Mm-hmm. And you cannot just think about yourself and others at the same time. So at some point, organizations maybe should start relaxing a little bit and start looking at the environment again. What are the needs of the people who have been our clientele in the past? They are still there, although they're home. They can step out of their home, but what can we do to redefine the services that we provide to them? And I think we should go a little bit beyond just Zoom and virtual something, and maybe start creating new models of service sector or subsector.
And Bill, this is we're all speaking in a bubble about these things, but you're living it every day.
Yeah.
What is your desire?
One of the big see how I can put this. People have been paying us to speak other languages to people who don't understand English. I would like to reverse that arrow. I would like to have a source for people who don't speak English to speak back to the institutions. So the money only goes in one direction, but if there's a way to return that loop, that would be my dream. And it always has been my dream, because the demand curve on people who are suffering or dealing with institutional indifference or absolute lack of services or disparities in health outcomes, disparities in housing, all of those things are not able to effectively communicate back upstairs, so-called, to those organizations that are entrusted with their welfare. So that's my big dream. It's never happened.
It's so exciting though, because what you're speaking, I know as an innovation, that desire is so founded on your original mission.
Yes.
Your mission has guided you to that thinking and that imagining of that future. And I think Hakan has shared with me and Ryan, this speaks to your work and research. Yes, it's such a positive example.
Yes, Elizabeth, absolutely 100% right about what drives me in my research. Every day I wake up and I try to think about how I can take the insights that I've developed that build on others, and to translate those to practitioners such as Bill. And the stories that Bill has relayed about how his organization has contracted, but also how he's being a mindful leader, right, in terms of how he can think about what are some areas that he can expand in, and also it's heartening in terms of being able to take this very tragic situation that we're in with COVID and potentially transform society in a positive way.
I'm hearing optimism, and when I think of optimism, I think of Hakan.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I am an optimist, and I continue to be optimist. And the more I'm conversating with those great people in our episodes, actually, the more I maintain my optimism. And I think this is the great thing about CBA Organizational Wisdom Studio episodes, where we draw new mental maps so we can have a clear vision about the future that's going to get brighter.
Thank you. Ryan Fuller, Bill Glasser, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.